And today we have with us friends who, although not LGBT themselves, have come to understand that we need to be loved, and they have just been exemplary in their support of our community. Oh, gracious God, we gather together before you this noon, aware of how blessed we are to have one another. In this very difficult time for our world, our nation, even our own reconciling group members, we know that you have placed people in our lives to lift us up when we feel we can't go on. Linda and Dwight particularly have been those people for us. May you bless them with your love and peace, and bless all those who partake of this food today, knowing that the strength they gain for it can be used to do your service. In Christ's holy name, amen. Amen. Okay.
Oh, we're halfway through it. Let's watch a version of it. Cheers up. It was true.
Books that we have up here. Most of you have probably seen them. Some of you may have not. This is a booklet that the church put out a few years ago, which includes statements by many people about why they support the reconciling work. If you would like one, it's been suggested by a treasurer that maybe a $5 donation would help in the continued printing of this book, but do not let that stop you from taking one if you do not have the $5. I am asking God's Holy Spirit to descend upon my heart and give me peace as I once again bring to you, before you, a remarkable couple. Just a remarkable couple. And they're supremely well educated. They have supremely educated others. They have written books separately and books together. But the one thing that I would say most of all is, if there ever was a couple who was on the same page, spiritually, intellectually, and lovingly, it is Dwight and Linda. They have been the spark of our reconciling committee, always giving us LGBT people, especially, smiles and hugs as part of their support. As we do get older, it seems that, at least for me, anything that we may have accomplished educationally or professionally in our lives becomes less and less important. It's whose lives we touched and how much of Jesus' love we distributed around the world and to our friends and family that really matters. And this couple, they're champs at that. Linda met Dwight, I believe, at the Evangelical United Brethren Youth Fellowship, and they were married in June of 1959. They soon moved to Boston, and Linda received a BS in elementary education at Boston University, while Dwight was in graduate school. She finished her master's degree in Christian education at Andover Newton Theological School, and then they moved on to Evanston, Illinois, so that Dwight could complete his PhD at Northwestern. She was able to transfer 2/4 of her work to Garrett Theological Seminary, and then back to Andover Newton and complete her thesis. And she graduated with a master's in religious education, cum laude, from Andover in 1964. They have 3 children, Jonathan, Mark, and Kristen. Linda is a diaconal minister and then ordained as a deacon in Full Connection in the United Methodist Church, I believe in Iowa. And after 20 years, this remarkable couple chose to they had been teaching at Westmer College, and they asked for an appointment where they could serve together. After 2 years as Minister of Education at St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Dubuque, Iowa, she was urged to join the faculty at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary. And so she and Dwight had a commuter marriage for a short period of time. Which I'm sure was, knowing them, was a very difficult time for them, being apart.
It seemed short.
Yes, I'm sure it didn't. So that's just a little bit. I mean, believe me, she's a remarkable woman in every respect, in her writing, her publishing, and her education. Dwight, and both of them are residents of Pilgrim Place, as all of you know. He is the Steiberg Professor Emeritus of Worship and Preaching at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary. Dwight is an ordained elder of the Iowa Conference of the United Methodist Church. He received a master's degree in philosophy from Boston University. Yay, my alma mater. His seminary degree from Andover Newton Theological School and his PhD in theology from Northwestern University, writing his dissertation on the theology of Nels F.S. Is it Ferrer? Ferrer, okay. For 20 years, he was on the faculty of Westmer College, as we mentioned, and he came to Garrett Evangelical faculty after serving as pastor at St. Luke's United Methodist Church. And let me just say this. The two of them together co-authored 2 books. First one entitled, and I mention this because these people have been reaching out beyond the lines for a long time, but their first book is entitled Sacramental Living, Falling Stars and Coloring Outside the Lines. And Syncopated Grace, Times and Seasons with God. They were both published by Upper Room Books. As I said, both of them, including Linda, have published other books and things. But what is, again, really remarkable about all of them is the love, both of them, is the love that they give everybody else, and how good they have made all of us feel, and how they've lifted us up. With that, we're going to...
Now is we'll start with the Vogel's story, and they will tell you a little bit about how they became reconciling. And this idea came about after our reconciling luncheon in May. We had a lovely dinner at Eddie's, eating this exact same food, I think, with our guest speaker, and they were both so committed to equality of all kinds, of everyone, including LGBTQ. And I asked the simple question, how did you come to this part of your life, to this understanding, to this commitment, to this testimony, in that you don't have children who are LGBTQ? Many of us in this room are touched in some way by gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or questioning people. Many of us have children or are gay or know people closely who are. And the Vogels don't, and I don't believe the Jordans do. So we thought it'd be interesting to hear how they arrived at this testimony at this point in their lives, given the fact that it really doesn't impact their lives directly. We'll start with the Vogels.
Thanks. I'm really pleased that I was able to come today. And I appreciate so much all your prayers and support. it's relationships. By the way, I wanted to say Bishop Jordan was our bishop in Iowa. So the connections just keep circling around. And I've been on a trip with Margaret in her travel business. So we're connected in a number of ways too. Well, I was a young, naive college professor this would have been, I think, 1971 or 72. And one of my Christian education students, Cindy, who was also our kids' favorite babysitter, and I paid her to clean our house, and we kind of became surrogate parents in a way for her. And one afternoon she said, "Could I meet you at your office tonight?" And I said, "Sure." So I went up to the office after supper, and she was there, and she said, "Linda, I'm a lesbian." And my stomach just went. And then I thought, now where did that come from? The very first thought that went through my head was, oh my, I let Chris stay all night with her in the dorm. And then I thought, what is wrong with you? Cindy loves Kristen. What is wrong with you? Where did that come from? And so it led me to reflect. I was aware of racism, even though I was raised in a pretty white place. I knew it was wrong. I have no conscious memory of being taught anything about homosexuality. I probably didn't even know the word. Nobody said, oh, this is a bad thing. So I'm thinking, where did this deep physiological reaction come from? And I decided that it comes from the culture. It's in the air we breathe, and we're not even aware we're catching this awful disease until it pops out in some way like this. So I said to Cindy, oh Cindy, I said, I'll sure walk with you on this journey, but I said, you're going to have to help me too, because I don't know very much about this. And then we suggested that she might want to talk to our colleague who was further along this journey, I guess, than we were. But that's how my journey began. And just a quick update, because I figure God has kind of an interesting sense of humor. Just when I thought, oh good, I've got this figured out, and this is good, she called me up on the phone. She'd graduated by then, and she'd been a youth minister in western Nebraska, and went undercover for the Nebraska State Police because somebody was selling her kids drugs. And then she moved to California, and she was in a couple of not very healthy relationships. And then she went to the police academy in LA, and she called several times, and we had long theological conversations. And when she was going to have to go in the simulator, a person, she wasn't sure she could do that, and she called, and we had a long talk about that. And she said, well, I couldn't do it to save my life, but can I do it if my partner's at risk? And so we had all these conversations, and it was real clear to me that Cindy was not bisexual. She's clearly lesbian. And so she called me up and she said, I got married. And I said, who to? And she said, Frank. He was another police officer in LA. I said, Cindy? She said, don't worry, you'll understand, you'll understand. Well, when we moved out here, Cindy and Frank came to see us at Pilgrim Place. I liked them a lot. And then the next time they called and wanted us to come to Huntington Beach to see them, because they had now retired from the police department. She said, oh, by the way, Frank is now Kelly. Oh, this is beginning to be more clear. And so just to hop way ahead, last year, after Kelly had gone through the physical surgery and all the stuff you have to do, they're legally married as man and woman, and it's still legal. But Kelly is clearly Kelly. And they called and invited us to come up to Acada and spend a week with them last year. So we did. We had a wonderful time. And I said, well, Cindy, you've been one of my greatest teachers, because just when I think I get it figured out, you throw something else at me. But she's one of the persons who our kids love and we love, and who's helped us on this journey.
One of the important factors in our journey has been an increasing sense of the incredible pain that our LGBTQ brothers and sisters go through. One of the early expressions of that, also in our days at Westmar College, was from Kurt. Kurt sang in my college choir. He was in our classes. He was gay. But you were the one that had that conversation with you. I'm going to let you tell that story.
He came to my office one day and he said, oh, I just had a horrible weekend. Because by then he was called to the ministry. He knew it. We knew it. It was clear. He said, I decided this weekend I had to tell my mom. And so I went home. He was a farmer's son from Nebraska. And he said, I was sitting at the kitchen table while she was giving dinner. And I said, Mom, I have something to tell you. I'm gay, and I've met this man. He was a Morningside College student. And his mom just turned around. She had a butcher knife in her hand. And she said, I wish I had the courage to put this through your heart. And I just could hardly take it in. How could a mother respond in this way? And what responsibility, a lot, does the church have for teaching people, and maybe not even teaching people, just for pumping the air out, the whole atmosphere of the culture and the church, and then the misuse of Scripture? How can we hurt people like this? And how can we now find the way to try to show people that God's grace and love is for everyone? So that was Kurt's story. Kristen, when she was a senior in high school, didn't have a boyfriend, and she wanted to date. She said, Mom, and he was in the church choir of Dwight's that she was also in. And she said, what would you think if I asked Kurt to take me? He was a college student. I said, I think that'd be fine. She knew he was gay. And so she asked him, and he came to see us and said, Kristen asked me if I'd take her to her prom. And I said, yeah, I know. And he said, well, I don't want to mislead her. And I said, oh, she knows you're gay. She just wants somebody to go to the prom with. And he said, okay, then I'd love to take Chris to the prom. So that was her junior, senior prom date. And we've been in touch with Kurt. He became a pastor in the MCC church eventually. So the United Methodist Church lost another good one.
You all know Sue Laurie, or most of you do at least. I was teaching systematic theology in this quarter. A woman showed up whose background I discovered was as a high school mathematics teacher. She was taking her sabbatical and going to seminary. In one of her first papers, I think it was her very first paper, she wrote something in the margin about the homosexual community and our need for justice, and I pounced on it with all 4 feet. Wrote something in the margin, and she was in to see me the afternoon that she got the paper back to tell me part of her story, how she continued to respond in her conference every time they asked for persons who were wanting to respond to ministry. And she would go forward year after year after year, and they wouldn't even give her a counseling elder to begin to talk about the process. I said, "Do you have a partner?" She said, "Yes, and you've met her." "Oh," I said, "Julie." Of course, why didn't I put that together? Because they had been on campus just the weekend before. And at one point in our conversations, I said, I just don't understand why people can't accept the reality that certain persons are wired this way, that it's who you are. It's just the way. I was feeling so progressive and good. And Sue said to me, "Well, that works for me. I've known I was lesbian since I was a little girl. But it doesn't work for Julie. Julie could relate to a man. Julie could relate to a woman. Julie has chosen to love me." One more needs to be said. But that was another important step upon the journey. While we were there at Garrett Evangelical, we were active in founding an organization called Sacred Worth. Since the discipline, along with many of the horrid things it does say that all persons are of sacred worth, how it manages to say that and say some of the other things that it says there is not at all clear to many of us, but nonetheless it does. And we had some wonderful experiences with that. Linda, say some things about our experience at Epworth.
We, for a time, belonged to the Epworth United Methodist Church in Chicago. It had been a well-to-do North Shore church until the neighborhood went downhill and the mansions were divided into small apartments. And it was a church just about ready to die. And the roof was leaking in the sanctuary, so they were meeting in their chapel. And the bishop, in his wisdom, I think, asked, can't think of his name, the pastor at the Chicago Temple, who had just retired, if this retiree, who'd been a little boy in that church when his father was pastor there, and it was a very progressive and up-and-coming church, if he would give 6 months to that church to see if they were going to live or die. And he said yes, he would. So he went into them and he said, "Okay, folks, here's our choice." He said, "You can continue to huddle in this chapel and worship together until you all die. Or you can open the doors to the neighborhood and become the church here." And they had some real strong, good church leadership at that point, lay leadership. And they said, "Well, we need to open the doors." And so, as the Spirit often does, the next week this man from the Philippines was walking by the church, and he saw the cross and flame. And he said, "Oh, that's my church." And so the next week, this whole contingent, expanded Filipino family of about 20 people showed up for church. And one thing led to another, and they started a tutoring program for neighborhood kids, and then a man froze in a dumpster kind of behind the church building one night, and they said, "We've got a gym. We can't let this happen." And these older single and widowed women just took it upon themselves to say, "We're going to have a homeless shelter." And they did all the stuff you have to do, and then they were able to get approval, and they put up posters, and then the neighbors complained, and so they were put on hold and told they couldn't do it, and they just looked at each other and said, "Okay, we'll have an all-night prayer meeting." And so when people showed up that first night, they said, "We're going to have an all-night prayer meeting because they won't let us open the shelter yet." And so we have this Bible and cross on this little table in the middle of the room. "You're perfectly welcome to come in here and sleep." And so that was the beginning of our homeless ministry there. And it's tough for a little church with not well-to-do members to have a homeless shelter and a kids tutoring program in the same facility. And they just found ways to be the church. And do you want to tell about the prayer time, that one Sunday morning,
yes.
and then we're about done?
One morning, the prayer time at Epworth was an amazing time. You might have an 8th grader say, "I need you to pray for my friend Jimmy, whose brother was shot in a drive-by shooting last week." But one that really sticks in my mind was one Sunday when a woman stood up. In the period, we divided it into joys and concerns, and she stood up under joys. And she said, "My partner," she was a lesbian, "my partner and I of 20 years broke up this last week. And I am standing up under joys rather than under concerns, because I am so grateful to be in a church where I can."
Many of you are probably aware that Mary Elizabeth Moore of this congregation wrote a chapter in this book, People of a Compassionate God, Creating Welcoming Congregations. She wrote a chapter on the process this church went through. I have a chapter in this book on the process that Epworth went through. And it was a hard process there because we studied for almost 2 years. And then the pastor said, as we came together to vote, "Now, I really am committed to not leave this church less racially diverse than it is right now." And we were a third African American, a third Filipino, and a third white by then. And the Filipino people were having trouble with this issue. She said, "I want to know if we will just all agree that if we don't get 66%, we won't do it yet." And we all agreed, and we lacked 66% by one vote. And so we studied for another whole year, and we were going to have charge conference after worship. And the Filipino grandfather of the clan said to the pastor as he walked out after church, "We're leaving now, but we'll be back next Sunday." So they left. They couldn't vote for it, but they gave us the gift of allowing us to make the right decision. So anyway, I think this is in the church library, and some of you might enjoy reading some of the case studies there. They don't all have good endings.
I also had the opportunity to teach systematic theology to Amy DeLong, who co-edited The Loyal Opposition, and the story of her trial and the way in which she survived that is an amazing story. I just want to close my part of it with one memory of Sue Laurie when we were gathered together in Union there at the seminary. And they were talking about the issue of homosexuality, the problem of homosexuality. And she stood up and she said, "I am not a problem. I am not an issue. I am a person. Thanks be to God."
Oh, and I just do have to say, because I can't believe I didn't say this, our daughter's here right now with us, and she said as we were getting in the car, "Mom, I can't go." She said, "What you're doing is really important, but it's just too close to home." And that's because her husband of 22 years came out as gay. Well, first he came out as bi, and he couldn't tell his parents. So we walked with them through that, and they stayed together. And then finally he knew that he was gay. And so we walked with them through that experience also, and their divorce. He was here to see us last year. The amazing thing to me is that he and Kristen are still very good friends, and Chris has a significant boyfriend now, and the three of them do stuff together sometimes. And I said to Kristen, "I would think that would be so hard." And she said, "It was, especially at first, but I just decided that's the kind of person I want to be."
Dean has suggested, and I think it's very appropriate, that maybe we just take a few moments and concentrate our memories and prayers of thanksgiving for the life of Jean Audrey. So we will be in prayer for a few moments. Amen.
We'll start with Margaret Crawford Jordan. Margaret Crawford Jordan was born in Chicago, Illinois. She received her bachelor's in education from the National College of Education, which is now National Louis University, and her master's in arts in guidance and counseling from Northeastern Illinois. Margaret married the Reverend Charles Wesley Jordan in 1959, which I believe is the same year the Vogels were named. Professionally, Margaret has taught in public schools of Chicago, Rockford, Oak Park, and Blue Island, Illinois. She was also a school counselor in Chicago and Urbandale, Iowa. She is still engaged in her travel consulting business, which she began in 1985. Margaret loves sewing, crafts of all kinds, digital photography, and machine embroidery, and she has designed and made, this is interesting, I didn't know, banners, pyramids, and displays for her local church, for BMCR, her sorority, and her service organizations. 6 of her banner designs were made into a kit that was distributed by Cokesville, and she continues her creativity with stoles, other church paraphernalia, personal greeting cards, and machine embroidered projects. Margaret is an active member of the Links Incorporated, a national service organization, as well as Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, in which she holds life membership. Charles Wesley Jordan, our bishop, was born in Dayton, Ohio, and raised in Chicago, Illinois. I see a common trend here with the Midwest and Chicago. He has degrees from Roosevelt University and Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary, and honorary degrees from Morningside College, Rust College, and Simpson College. His ministry in the Northern Illinois Conference included Woodlawn United Methodist Church in Chicago. He was the director of urban ministry in Rockford. He was the conference program staff superintendent of the Chicago Southern District and senior pastor of St. Mark United Methodist Church. He was elected to the episcopacy at the North Central Jurisdictional Conference in 1992 and was assigned to the Iowa area. He retired from active episcopal assignment on September 1, 2000, and in January 2001, he became the bishop in residence at Claremont School of Theology. Since moving to Southern California, he has served 7 years on the board of Progressive Christians Uniting and president for 3 years. He was also the convener for Hope for the Children of Africa for the CalPAC Annual Conference. As you know, he is married to Margaret Crawford Jordan, who is also on our panel today, and they have 2 adult daughters, Diana, an actor and a private school teacher, and Charlie Jordan Brookins, Senior Vice President for Original Programming for the BET Networks. The Jordans also have 2 grandsons, James Wesley and Jordan Gregory Brookins.
I have gotten to the place where I need something to lean on other than Jesus. I appreciated very much the sharing of Dwight and Linda. And ours is going to be a little different in that Margaret and I talked about the question, why are we reconciling persons? And I'm going to share why we are reconciling persons. I'm going to begin early, and I'm going to keep most of my early remarks are going to be rather positive. And one of them is the fact that in our formative years, both of us were surrounded with a biblical faith. Our understanding of God is love. We should love God, and that we should love our neighbors. She did in the Quinn Chapel A&E Church. I did in Gammon Church in Chicago, subsequently Hartston Church. Those kinds of concepts were also a part of our family life. Now, granted, at that time, years ago, we were not encountering gay and lesbian people. At least we didn't know that, anyway. They were not out, around, obvious, conspicuous. And so we focused on who we were as God's children. And I say that to say that if it were not for those formative years, we would have had a much more difficult time in later years when we encountered and related to persons who were gay and lesbian and a part of that community. And so when you ask the question, when we ask ourselves the question, why are we reconciling persons? Why are we welcoming persons? Why do we reach out? Because that's what our parents did. That's what my mother, my father, her mother, her father. And another thing that we have to say in terms of why we are reconciling persons, that we're black people, obviously so. We know what it means to be excluded. We know what it means to be denied. We know what it means to be discriminated against. And we can be out of that understanding, or at least out of that existence, find ourselves more open to those who are experiencing the same thing. People would say to me, why as a bishop, why was I so concerned and so active as far as women in ministry? Why was it that our conference at that time had more clergy couples than any conference in the whole church? because we were actively making sure that we responded to their needs. The first persons on the appointment list were the clergy couples. That's where we began. And we began that way because I insisted that it be that way, because I was aware of certain issues related to women in ministry. But the formative years and the understanding of what it means to be denied, to be discriminated against, to be excluded. When I was in the Northern Illinois Conference, I was on a conference staff, and there was a coalition group, unofficial, that was the Racial Ethnic Coalition Group. And these were persons who represented the Black Caucus, the MCR, the Junta, the Hispanic Caucus, Asian American Caucus, and also the Women's Caucus was a part of that as well. And their purpose was to be advocates for more inclusion in the life of the conference and in the life of the church of racial ethnic persons, and they were an advocacy group. There was another caucus in that annual conference, and this has been a long time ago, probably 40 years. Affirmation. Affirmation was the gay and lesbian caucus. And I was assigned to work with, at my request, to be a staff resource to the coalition. Just like I would any of the official boards and commissions of the church, of the conference. The chair of affirmation came to me and said, "We'd like to be a part of the coalition." And I said, "That's not my decision to make. The coalition would have to make that decision itself. I'm a staff resource to it. And they're unofficial, they're organized, etc." So I took that request to the coalition. And we had a very long discussion. The Black Caucus representatives, the Hispanic Caucus representatives, the Asian to some degree, and I again this was some time ago, I'm assuming changes have taken place in the meantime. The women were about the only ones that were positive in the whole, in the coalition. And I intervened and I said, "Why are you here? Are you here because you feel that you've been excluded? Are you here because you feel that you need empowerment? Then why is it that we cannot identify with these persons who also are a part of the same common journey? Different journeys, but common cause." And so they did decide that they would accept the affirmation group. But needless to say, they got some pushback from some of their members. And would you believe that one of the arguments was this, that when we make statements or when we make recommendations, if affirmation is a part of the list, the endorsers, then that may have something to do with our credibility. And I said, credibility be damned. You don't have any credibility. But there again, they needed to be reminded of the common cause of empowerment, of inclusion, even though persons may have come from, been on different journeys. So if you ask the question, why are we reconciling persons? That's one of the reasons, because we were a part of those who had been excluded and had been denied, and we could more readily reach out and understand, even though there were colleagues who had our same experience who could not do the same. But that was a part of our experience which was positive for us in terms of being reconciled. When I was in seminary, very evangelical, one of my good friends was Harold Burris. And Harold, we became very good friends. In fact, we served together. We served in approximately the same geographical area in Chicago early on after graduation from seminary. And Harold's spouse, Helen, was a good friend of Margaret's. We did some things, some family things together. He subsequently moved east, and then came back west to the Midwest and was in the Iowa Conference for a while. Served at the Wesley Foundation in Cedar Falls, in northern Iowa. Well, Harold subsequently took a special appointment and became what was then a minister to society. And he worked with the old Health, Education, Welfare Department in Washington. And I used to see him from time to time. Whenever he was in Chicago, in the Chicago area, he would call, we'd get together, although he lived in Washington, D.C. Sometime after that, he openly declared that he was gay. He was divorced, and he took early retirement. But in his retirement, this was early retirement, still young, he began an agency that provided counseling and other resources for persons with HIV and AIDS in the Black and Hispanic community. And because of his experiences with the federal government and with other agencies, he was able to get grants, etc. It was a very helpful resource in that work. His last conference was the Iowa Conference. So in fact, I was his bishop. And when I became his bishop, and when I was assigned to Iowa and had our covenant service, I looked out in the congregation and I saw him. And I said to Margaret, that's Harold. He had come from Washington to be there. And I looked at him and I said, Harold has AIDS. He has AIDS. I said, I know the condition of his body, the look in his eyes. I said, I've seen this before. He has AIDS. I had the opportunity to, whenever I was in Washington, to go by and see him. Either see him or talk to him on the phone. The last time I saw him, we could only talk, I went to his apartment. He only had enough energy for us to talk about 20 minutes. And then he said, you're going to have to leave. I need to rest. We walked to the door, he turned around, And he said to me in about as strong a voice as he could muster, "Of course you know you're going to preach at my memorial service." And about 3 months later, I heard from his son that his dad had gone. And so I went to Washington. And in this nearly full congregation, there was diversity, the likes of which I have never seen. And when they came to the time when people were able to speak, from the floor, just anyone who wished to speak, the gentleman got up and said, "This man taught me how to live a full life while I was dying." So you ask me why, and ask us, we are reconciling persons. Because of this black gay man who was a reconciler, who reached out to try to make the world a better place. It's one of those things, one of the pieces of our journey. One more thing. When I was pastor at St. Mark Church, Chicago, which was at that time not a reconciling congregation. I don't know whether it is now or not, but it wasn't then, I know. It wasn't my fault. But there was a young man who's gay who sang in the choir. And he was not exactly completely accepted by all the choir members. Most members accepted him because he had a good voice. They needed him. But there was one woman in particular who was traditional, downright as close to being a fundamentalist as you can think of. And I would say homophobic, really. She had a difficult time even being close to him, even in the choir. Well, this young man was assaulted, brutally assaulted one night outside of his apartment. The police called it a hate crime, and that's what it was. One evening after a choir rehearsal, about a week after that, the choir members, some of the choir members said, "Why don't we go over and see him? Visit him." And so they persuaded this woman who was most antagonistic toward him to go with him. And she went, and I went with him. And there he was in bed, in his bedroom. They were surrounding the bedroom. Here he was, broken arm, bandaged head. And this woman moved in closely and said, "How could they do this?" And then she said, "This is God's child." The connection of sacred worth, which she had not identified with earlier, now came to fruition. And the Holy Spirit was in that room, and she was transformed. And she was changed from that time on. So why are we reconciling persons? Because we believe and have hope that the Spirit, God's Spirit, is at work in individuals, in the church even, in the world. God's Spirit is at work about transformation. About transformation. And so we say humbly, we must confess, we claim to be reconciling persons, and yet we know that there are times when our actions may not be congruent with the claim, but we boldly claim it. We boldly claim it. And we will be reconciling because God's Spirit is a part of who we are. It is, we have been formed, we have suffered ourselves, we have had relationships, and we believe that the Spirit is always moving.
We would like to open it up briefly for any questions you might want to direct to any of the panelists in this matter. Does anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to make?
This is going to be a statement instead. We became reconciling when we lived in Atlanta, New York City, and saw the people who couldn't live in their own hometowns, but who had to go to the cities because no one would accept them.
First, I'd like to commend the panel. Wonderful. When we were in Saudi Arabia, and when we were able to attend a Christian church on the base, we had to get permission from someone to get in on Aramco. That person happened to be the father of Matthew, who was strung up on the barbed wire in Montana. Was it Montana or Wyoming? And it was gut-wrenching. His wife never joined him because she became a very active member of somehow remembering Matthew in a form that was very positive.
Turn it over to the Vogels for any final comments you'd like to make.
Didn't know that was coming. When my former student, Amy DeLong, who, some people just think theologically, it just oozes out of them naturally. It's the way they think. Sue Laurie is one and Amy DeLong is another. They don't know how to think any other way than thinking theologically. When Amy came and asked if I would write a chapter for the loyal opposition about homosexuality in the church as a part of my story, of course, I agreed. I was looking at that again, and I understand why I've said what I've said, but I'm very much still in the same place. Why is this so important to us? Well, we've seen people hurting. We stand with them because to stand against them would be to refuse to go where God leads us. And why do we stand where we stand? Because we can't with integrity do otherwise. Linda said in the hospital last week that she really wanted to do this today. I think what we want to say is the concern to be reconciling people in the church and in the world today is a matter of life and death. Life and death for our gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, queer brothers and sisters. Life and death for the church. And that's the reason why our testimony had to be given today. Thank you for letting us share.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, these were moving presentations. Thank you, Bishop. Yours was amazing. And Linda and Dwight, We should end, I think, by saying that there is not a person in this room who doesn't hold the two of you very close to their hearts at this time, and all you have to do is pick up the phone and call any of us, and we'll do anything we can for you, because that's the kind of persons you have been to us. And we love you, and hold that first and foremost in your mind. We love you, and as I said earlier, you've just been a spark plug to our reconciling group, and you always will be. That is your greatest contribution, I think, to me and Dean in trying to direct us in a positive route. And there were times when we had a few business meetings when we had to discuss some things that were difficult, and the two of you always had just a wonderful perspective on what we should do and how we should do it, and Linda always saying, yes, we can do this. Yes, we can do this. So we thank you so much for being here today, and for the Jordan's attendance here also, and the very moving testimony that the bishop has given us today. Thank you all for coming. Just one little plug for a forthcoming seminar that won't be until January, but I hope you'll put it on your calendar. It'll be the third Sunday in January. I hope to bring you a program on LGBTQ foster youth. It's something we don't think about often, but I have presided over proceedings involving LGBTQ teens, and many of them kicked out of their homes by their parents because of religious reasons, and they don't want them anymore. So they end up in the system. And I hope to bring a couple of them here to talk to you about their experience. I guess the fact is that about 20% of all children in the foster care system are LGBTQ. And the homeless shelters that help outside the system, that help teenagers such as the Covenant House, about 40% of all homeless youth are LGBTQ. So what a horrible thing. That's not very reconciling when we allow teenagers to wander the streets unloved, unwanted, no place to live. So I hope you will put that on your calendar. I think you'll find it very inspiring, especially to hear from some of these kids themselves. Thank you so much, and thank you, participants today.